Hi, I'm Doug Irvine from Leicester Aldridge Residential Property Team, and welcome to another episode of Property Particulars Podcast. Today, my guest is Rachel Gimson. Rachel, hello.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are
Good.
you?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thank you for making the journey up.
You're welcome.
To the London office,
Welcome.
even though you were up quite a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's always a treat.
Yeah, exactly. So to start off with, tell me a bit about you, your journey within LA, who you are, what team you're from, etc.
Okay. So I work in the Property Litigation team. I'm one of the partners in the team. There are two partners, one senior associate who you have met recently on another episode of this
Yes.
podcast, Rebecca, and Tara, who is a newly qualified solicitor. So there are four of us working mainly within the property litigation team. It's a coincidence that they're all female. That wasn't deliberate, but it's the way it's happened. And we work on anything that involves property, land, leases, anything that potentially is a dispute or already is a dispute.
Yeah. And so you become, and I think actually when I did chat with Rebecca on this, and I think we mentioned it then as well, like you become a bit of a hot desk for the phone ringing from everybody across the firm, really.
Yeah.
Because it's not necessarily just other property teams
No.
that might need your assistance, or our clients might need your assistance. So yeah, it becomes a bit of a juggling game for you as to, like, I suppose, which bits could become more urgent.
Exactly. Yeah, we're very much a support. We obviously have our own standalone work, to call it that, but we're also there to help anyone who needs it when they need it, and we
Yeah.
always try and prioritise what deadlines you might have, especially from a transactional side.
Yeah.
If you've got something that needs doing on a certain day, then we try and drop everything to help you where
Yeah.
we can, because we're all in it together, really.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that can just be even like just a quick check of a notice or something like that
Yep.
for clients where we just want that extra comfort.
Yep.
And so we might not necessarily introduce you to that
No.
client, for example, but just within the Leicester Aldridge
Yep.
team, we want the extra comfort and support that we've had somebody with and sometimes just another look at it,
Yeah,
a document
second
for
pair of eyes.
us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the really useful thing, I think, about your team in particular for the firm as well, for support that we have that. But of course, we have more of an input with your team because we do need your team quite a lot. Now, that doesn't mean that things go wrong all the time, because sometimes it's preventing things going wrong. But it did make me think about the recent questions that we have from our clients, and also an area of law that's kind of fast evolving and recent, and that is the Building Safety Act.
That's right.
And yeah, so, I mean, we've spoken quite a lot about it. We even had a little firm steering group when it first came out to
We
kind of
did.
understand how we might tackle it.
Yeah.
But I get asked lots of questions, and sometimes I need help. And actually, even today in the office, I'm sure as you're sitting
I-
opposite me, you heard me on the phone to a client. I could see you looking at me, and I will talk to you about that after this
Okay.
podcast, if I may. But from your understanding, can you give us a very basic overview as to what the BSA is and like where we need your help?
Yeah, exactly. I think some people have heard of the title but don't necessarily know what it means. And
Yeah.
I think some practitioners are the same. Some people who do the buying and selling haven't quite understood exactly what it is. Not necessarily people in LA, but just the wider community.
Yes.
We are dealing with a piece of legislation that came as a consequence of the Grenfell tragedy. It's all aimed about fire safety risk, protecting individuals and protecting leaseholders from the really large costs that can come from particularly cladding, although it's not just limited to cladding, which is one of the myths that I think people already think. It can be
Right.
wider than that, covering other fire safety issues. But it's particularly relevant in London because you have a lot of larger blocks, but it does apply anywhere if the block is big enough for it to qualify. And that's really
Yeah.
question number one,
Okay.
is whenever you're looking at a transaction, does the Building Safety Act apply to this? And if it does, what do I need to ask? What do I need to do? What do my clients care about?
Yes.
And the sort of questions that come to us are, what are the consequences of the Act applying? What does it mean for me as an individual, as a leaseholder?
Yeah.
And there are some real complications to this piece of legislation. Whilst it was necessary, many would say, to have something because the industry didn't seem to be necessarily regulating itself.
Yeah, I think so.
It was, in some respects, knee-jerk because it was reacting to something, but it
Yeah.
took 5 years to come about. So
that,
Grenfell was
yeah.
2017 and the Act didn't come out until 2022.
Wow, okay, yeah. When you put it like that, that's actually
It's
a
actually
good
quite a long
reminder.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's still very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
There have been, I believe, over 20 pieces of secondary legislation, so something else that clarifies
Okay.
what the Act says
Right.
for us to implement. So there is such uncertainty as to exactly what it means. So it is really important for clients to understand what they're buying in
Yeah.
particular, and what impact it will have.
Yeah, and we've definitely had already clients on both sides where I've needed help from you and your team. So either buying or people that bought on the on the turn of the legislation coming out, and then we need a bit more help for those. Some clients that have come back to us to ask for more detailed
Yes.
advice on it. And then equally, like the person you overheard me on the phone to today was a selling client, and sometimes it's just the extra guidance for us. So it's not only that you're guiding our clients, you're actually helping guide the residential property team through this.
Yeah, very much so in relation to what inquiries you need to ask.
Yeah.
If you're acting on the purchase, or which ones you need to answer if you're acting on the
Yes.
sale. There is a whole regime of certificates that's been created that didn't exist before, and there are all sorts of triggers as to when they need to be given by either a landlord or a leaseholder.
Yeah.
And the term landlord doesn't just mean the person who owns the block, it can mean everybody in between. So there can
Yes.
be lots of different interests with complicated buildings,
Yeah.
and lots of different people needing to understand what they need to do and when they need to do it. And the main consequence of that is ascertaining whether you might have the protections of the Act and being able to not have to contribute such large costs towards what are often millions and millions of pounds worth of work on the big
Yeah.
blocks. And I think there was a lot of, people will have heard in the news at the time, a few years ago now, before the Act came out, well, leaseholders will just have to deal with it. That's the flat they've bought. They have to accept it.
Yeah.
And slowly that was eroded, and people realised that you can't expect a leaseholder to find tens of thousands, if not in some
Yes.
instances hundreds of thousands of pounds,
Yeah.
and therefore the work wasn't going to get done. So it's an interesting Act. It's a little confusing,
Yeah.
and it's fast changing. So every time we think
imagine.
we know the answer to something, something else happens, and we have to revisit everything.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely been, just in general chat with you, like there's definitely been some blocks of flats that we're aware of in the residential team here in London, which pre the Act were, unmortgageable because of they had works that needed to be done.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know whether necessarily there's a correlation between the Act coming out and the support being there, but I've seen some of those blocks come back onto the market now.
That's interesting.
Which is obviously amazing for the people that live there that
Yeah.
either need to remortgage or sell, etc. But to kind of finish up on that point, it's such a great support that we have, because I suppose on our side, when we're so transactional and so busy, sometimes we don't have the time to shut everything else off and read an Act and analyse that. So
And even if
thank
you read it, you probably wouldn't know because it's so complicated.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a great support network with
Yeah.
you guys. So thank you so
So
much.
we work as a wider team.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, a different question for you. So some other transactions that we work on together, not related to building safety at all. And so one in particular that I'm thinking of, which is the last transaction, which was actually a referral from you to me, which was a lovely sale transaction, a flat, but it came about, I think, because the property had been empty for a while. Now the client's got a buyer. And so there's a bit of a mix-up. Sometimes I'm referring property jobs over to your team, but we love getting referrals the other way. So thank you, and it's a great one. But how did that one come about to you?
Yeah, that one was an interesting matter. The reason the property's been empty for so long is because the current owner had undertaken quite considerable works to it, and it wasn't until they were quite far through the job that they appreciated that they needed to ask the landlord for consent for what they were doing, and that consent wasn't forthcoming to finish it. So it got to a certain point and stopped.
Okay.
And there'd been a bit of a stalemate. And so instead the clients decided to sell it and move on rather than try and resolve the issue.
Yeah.
But it's a really good example of how important it is to understand what your lease actually says, and what you have to do and how you have to do it. You know, when do you need to ask the landlord for permission to do something? When can you just do it because you want to?
Yeah.
Where's that line? And all of that should be in the documents when they purchase.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably one of the things on a selling point of view. In fact, actually, the conversation that you heard me have with a client earlier today, that same point was reared up as well, because some of the inquiries we already have through are to do with previous works that have taken place.
I see.
And so then we have to decide how to answer that as a seller. But it comes back to that, understanding. And I do quite often get a client saying to me that they didn't necessarily have a full understanding from a different firm of solicitors, of course, when they bought the property 20 years ago. Yeah. And sometimes it's a time point, but and if works have been done quite a long time ago, maybe there's less of an issue. But sometimes it's works that have happened quite recently. And so we quite often have to deal with the license for alterations, which is the consent bit to do certain works in a leasehold property. And so you get quite a few of those inquiries come through to you?
Yeah, we get all sorts, but we definitely get people that have either ended up in a dispute about something like that, or, as you say, have just realised it when they've come to sell. They can continue for years without someone raising it, and then suddenly it's a problem.
Yeah.
And the longer that it passes, the harder it can be to resolve sometimes.
Yeah.
Although if it goes too long, then sometimes that can work in your favour. So
of course.
There's a right, there's never a right or a wrong time.
Yeah, and that goes back to, again, a bit the point we've just mentioned before, that for us in our team, just kind of getting through that for a selling client or a buying client, just to have that extra support from your team is so important. And so, even though most of your team is based in the Bournemouth office, you are up quite regularly, all of you actually. So thank you very much for that. And we're glad we can refer each other work.
Exactly.
Referring is the best thing we like in LA.
We're really lucky. We've got, we can service almost everything here.
Yeah,
so
true.
Everything that someone needs help on, we can usually find a home.
Yeah, and you, for you, I mean, we get referral work a lot, but you must get it from all teams across the firm.
Yeah.
So you get to know everybody, basically.
We do, yeah. We do tend to get work from everywhere. Anything that touches a property or land, and if you think about it, that can be anything. It arises in probates. It arises in corporate. It arises in, obviously, the real estate team generally, commercial and residentials. Almost everywhere. People. I mean, I've even had a referral from personal injury, which you wouldn't expect. So it comes from everywhere.
Good stuff. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Let's go a bit more lighthearted now.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask a few more probing questions. So we're going to go on to, so it's called property particulars, but I like to ask everybody about your own personal property particulars, if you do not mind. So i.e., have you bought and sold a property before?
Yes.
Have you been, was that a stressful thing? Were you a good client? Was there anything unusual about it that you can tell us?
Yeah. So I've bought and sold a flat.
Okay.
Not in a block that would have been affected by the BSA, although it was a long time ago. And I've bought a house which I'm still in.
Amazing.
So been through it a couple of times. Using former colleagues to assist me, which sometimes helps and sometimes doesn't. I'm sure they might have a different view on having me as a client, but I've referred them extra work since. So
perfect.
They haven't been too stressful. I've been lucky. They haven't been too stressful.
Okay.
Some delays here and there, but sometimes the right place is worth waiting for.
Yeah.
But as I think I mentioned to you before, I'm a firm believer that you end up where you're supposed to end up, and there's a certain element of fate and property ownership. So our current house that we've been in for a number of years, we purchased. We weren't even the highest bidder. There was a lot of interest, but we met the owners just coincidentally walking past going into the viewing, and they decided that we were the sort of people they wanted to buy the house, and they accepted our offer regardless. So and it's
that definitely was meant to be then.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's our family home. We love it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I agree with you completely on that bit, which I do quote to clients a lot, especially sometimes that horrific occasional thing that happens in property transactions, the word gazumping. But I often say to clients in that moment where they're upset and let down, like it maybe wasn't the one.
Yeah.
And they all come back and with the next property, might be 6 months or a year later, but then they're like, this one is even better.
Exactly.
Which of course it is, because that's the one that's always meant to be for them.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Thank you for that. Right. A few of my quick fire questions, if you don't mind. So what is the best thing about living where you live?
Oh, I can answer this one quite well because I haven't always lived there.
Okay.
So I'm originally from Cambridge, but live in Bournemouth now, and have done since I was 12. And I've chosen to stay because I actually love where I live.
Okay.
I would say the best thing is that it's so close to everything. You know, a lot of people would always say the beach, and I understand that that's a massive draw, but we're also really close to the forest. We're only a couple of hours from here.
Yeah.
You know, we've really got the best of every world. You know, if you think about what you might want to do, you can probably get to it from Bournemouth in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, that's
apart from
nice.
Scotland, maybe we're the opposite end from there. But most things we can do, and I really love where I live.
Yeah, I keep on. So I see all these beautiful places on the south coast, and then obviously I come down to the Bournemouth office quite a lot. But the days that we're down, something like this, I get a bit like you coming up now, where you're involved so much in the office life for that bit. But I definitely want to go on a day trip to a few places. So I'll come and take you up on that. We'll go for a day trip.
Okay.
What is your, again, maybe going on the places that you commented about being such a great place to live and everything around you, what's maybe like the best pub or restaurant, or one that you would, if I was visiting, which pub or restaurant would you take me to?
I would say recently, so I took my family to a pub we'd never been to before because it had an outside play area, and I thought my son would enjoy it, for a Sunday lunch for Father's Day, and it was the best Sunday lunch I have had in a very, very, very long time.
Amazing.
Should I give it a plug?
Yeah, definitely.
It's called the New Queen Inn, near Sopley, Avon Causeway Way. So it's a little bit. It's not in the town centre, but it was good. It was lovely. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm trying to find an excuse to go back.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, I'll come down. Maybe not so much for the children's playground, but the pub lunch and a good pint. Yeah, I'm there. Okay, last question then. What is the best thing about your job at LA?
I love my job. I love working in property litigation. I was really nervous when I began specialising in prop lit because you think it's going to be quite narrow. I think a lot of people think the more niche you get, the less you actually do variety-wise. But actually, there's so much. No two cases are the same. No 2 days are the same. I do such a wide variety that I love it. The best thing about LA, I feel like I found my home. I've been here 5 years. I've progressed from an associate to partner in that time. I think there's a huge amount of give and take and respect here for people. If you do a good job, that's rewarded. And I think I can't speak highly enough of
it's a good
LA.
team. It's a good team.
Really
When we
good
say team, we mean the whole firm.
Exactly.
And even though we have 3 independent, separate offices, like there's a good mix between and visiting. There's never a day where I don't have suddenly a text or an email or a Teams message that so-and-so is coming up from a different office to London, which I absolutely love, and we find space all the time for you to come and join us.
Exactly. We love being able to get out and see everybody, and the way of the world now, we can video, WhatsApp, email, anything you want to connect, you can. But it's always nice to actually come and see everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thank you.
Catch us again for another episode of Property Particulars, and do remember to watch out for all of our episodes on YouTube and Spotify, and check out our property Instagram page, which is @Leicester Aldridge Property.